My question is, if you were to recommend a book that you think young people should read, or a book that's inspired you the most over the course of your life, what book would that be and why?
All right, well, let me answer it this way. When I was growing up, I couldn't afford to buy books. My family didn't have the money for it. So when you're in my city, when I grew up, Baltimore, you could get a library card and take books out of a library when you were 6 years old. So when I was 6 years old, I got a library card and you were allowed to take out 12 books a week. I would read them all on the first day, and I had to wait till the next week before I could take another 12 books out. Reading became a very important part of my life. I now try to read, and I do read about 100 books a year. And I try to read books in areas that I'm interested in, and I have programs to educate people about things I've read. So I started a program to educate members of Congress about American history. So I have a program every month. I get a great author, Doris Kearns Goodwin, David McCullough. In a couple of days, I'll do Ken Burns. I have a dinner with members of Congress. I do it at the Library of Congress. I invite members of Congress only. We get about 300 members of Congress coming in. I interview the author about the book, and then I have members of Congress ask questions, and they learn a lot. And I actually have required the Democrats and Republicans to sit together, which is a rare thing, that they can actually talk to each other, and maybe it brings some civility to Washington. But I think that my concern about book reading is not just the illiteracy problem. In our country, 12% of the people are functionally illiterate. Functionally illiterate means you can't read past the 4th grade level, 12% of our people. But a large percentage of our people are illiterate, which is to say they can read, but they don't. In our country, this is my country, this is hard to believe, 30% of people who graduate from college never read another book in their life. Their view is, I got my degree, I don't need to read another book. It's sad. Now, I can't cite any one book that I would say is the most important book. I've read so many books. I'm inspired by so many. I just finished I'll mention one I just read the other day. I interviewed the author about one of the most amazing things that ever happened in the last 200 years. It's a book by a guy named Scott Berg on Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh became the most famous person in the history of the world when he flew 33 and a half hours from New York to Paris. Why so famous? Because that was the first time that the world was communicating with each other, so people knew about it all over the world. It was a 33 and a half hour flight. He won a prize for doing it, and he became the rest of his life one of the most famous people on the earth. And it's a stunning book, and the most stunning thing is the man won the Pulitzer Prize for it, and he did this enormous research. He spent 10 years writing this book. He knew everything, and then after the book came out, he got a call from somebody saying that he didn't have one thing in the book. And it was a call that led to a letter, and it turned out that Charles Lindbergh, who had been married for his whole life from the age of 27 or 29 to Anne Morrow, and had fathered 5 children with her, one of whom was kidnapped and killed, that he had 7 children with 3 different German women, and that had not come out. And one of the children of the German women had written to Scott Berg and said, by the way, you should have known that he had this other life. So, when you look at great men and women, sometimes they have a life that you don't know about. So he had these 7 children, I guess some of whom, or maybe all of whom, the 3 German women are alive. But that was a book that I just read recently, and it's good. I'd recommend another book about American history that won the Pulitzer Prize called The Hemings of Monticello, about Thomas Jefferson's affair with Sally Hemings, with whom he fathered most likely 6 children, and how he, whether it was an affair or sexual relationship that was inappropriate, whatever you want to define it, he spent 39 years of his life in a relationship with a slave and fathered 6 children with her. So it was a stunning book. But there are a lot of great books. Just too many for me to think of which is the most important one.
Thank you very much for sharing your family background with us. My mom is actually a mail carrier, so your points about how it can be an advantage coming from a working class background really resonated with me. Before I ask the question, can I just see a show of hands who in this room comes from a working class background? Yeah. So we see some hands, but maybe if we would have asked the same questions when you went to school, we would have seen a couple of more hands.
Probably more.
Right? So why do you think that is? Why do you think social mobility is more difficult nowadays than it was before? And what can we do about that?
Well, if I knew that answer, I'd be running for President of the United States. there is income inequality is something that is getting worse, not better, in the United States and I think in Western Europe. And I analogize it to something in physics. It was thought for a while that after the Big Bang Theory that the stars and the universe was expanding, but then it was going to kind of come back and it was shrinking and coming back to the center. We now know that was wrong. Actually, the universe is expanding. And it's the same thing with income inequality. We thought as we got better educated, more sophisticated, we could design economic systems that bring people back to the middle. It turns out that as sophisticated as we are, it's going the opposite way. It's like the universe. It's expanding, and the income inequality is worse. I think it's going to take decades, if not generations, before you can fix it, at least in my country, because of better education and so forth. But social mobility is a different issue. Social mobility deals with the ability of people at the bottom to rise to the top. Now, in our case, we call in the United States the so-called American dream, that you can come in as an immigrant or from a blue-collar family, and you work hard, you can get to the top. There's a sense now, particularly among minorities in the United States, that opportunity is gone or reduced. And that very often people in the underclass don't think they can do what I did. They don't think they can rise up. I think that's unfortunate. I do think generally if you work hard and you're smart, you will probably do better in life than if you're lazy and dumb. But that's not always the case. Generally, people, though, who have changed the world come from blue-collar backgrounds or lower middle backgrounds. It's rare that somebody was born into the Forbes 400 and invented Amazon or invented great companies. So generally, if you look at the great entrepreneurs and you look at the people in the Forbes 400, at least in the United States, these are people who came from blue-collar backgrounds, sometimes dysfunctional families, and also from lower middle-class families. If you're in the wealthy, if you're born into great wealth, it's actually a big disadvantage if you're going to try to be an entrepreneur, because you usually are not going to be hungry enough, you're not going to be dedicated enough. If you're going to be an entrepreneur like Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs or with Mark Zuckerberg, coming from a not wealthy family gives you much more drive. And so that's why I said in the beginning, I feel advantaged to have no money when I grew up. At the time I didn't know that. My children have a big disadvantage because it's hard for them to be as driven as I am, because they just know that I've got enough money and they probably are not going to be on the street anytime soon.